He wasn't supposed to still be there. Not after the frost came. Not after the rain carved thin rivers through the soil and the wind carried the scent of winter across the hills. But every morning, before the sun had fully risen over the quiet rows of white stone, the groundskeeper would see him again. The same shape, the same stillness. A German shepherd, lying beside a single grave as if time itself had forgotten to move him. His name was Rex, though no one had called it in months. His coat, once thick and proud, now carried the dull trace of dust and weather, sable fur clinging to a frame leaner than it should be. Yet his eyes, those amber eyes, remained fixed on the name etched into the stone before him, as if reading something no one else could see. Daniel Hayes, Staff Sergeant, United States Marine Corps. The letters were clean, precise, untouched by time. Unlike the dog who refused to leave them. People had tried. At first, it was gentle. A woman from town brought food, kneeling a few feet away, her voice soft as she slid a bowl across the grass. "Hey there, buddy, you don't have to stay here." Rex didn't move. Not toward her. Not toward the food. His ears twitched once at the sound of her voice, then settled back into that same quiet watch. Later, a man in a uniform, another Marine, approached with slower steps, something heavier in his posture. He stood beside the grave, eyes lowered, then glanced at the dog. "You're still on duty?" "Huh," he murmured. Rex lifted his head slightly, just enough to acknowledge the presence. But he didn't stand. He didn't follow. Whatever command he was waiting for, it hadn't come. Days turned into weeks. Weeks into something harder to measure. Rain came, soaking the earth until the ground softened beneath his paws. Still he stayed. Wind howled through the cemetery at night, bending the trees into long, whispering shadows. Still he stayed. And when the first cold front rolled in, dropping temperatures into the low 30s, frosting the edges of every headstone, people began to whisper. "Dogs don't do this," someone said. Not for this long. But Rex wasn't waiting like other dogs wait. There was no pacing. No restless searching. Only stillness. As if he had already found what he needed and was guarding it. Then came the number. 117 days. That's how long the groundskeeper had been counting. 117 mornings of the same sight. The same silence. The same dog who refused to leave. Until the night, the sky changed. It started with a low roll of thunder far beyond the hills, the kind that didn't belong to the season. The air shifted, heavy and electric, carrying a scent that made the leaves tremble before the wind even touched them. Clouds swallowed the stars one by one, and for the first time in months, Rex moved before dawn. Not much, just a slow lift of his head, ears rising, eyes narrowing at something unseen in the distance. As if, finally, after all this time, something had answered back. The thunder did not rush in all at once. It lingered, low and distant, like a warning carried across miles of dark sky, and the cemetery felt different beneath it, as if the ground itself had begun to listen. Rex rose slowly, stiff from weeks of stillness, his joints resisting before yielding inch by inch. And for the first time in 117 days, his body did not return to the earth. He stood, not fully steady, not strong, but upright, facing something beyond the rows of headstones, something no human eye could follow. The wind shifted again, colder now, brushing through his fur in quiet waves, carrying a scent that did not belong to rain or soil or stone. It was faint, almost gone, but it was there. Memory. Rex's ears tilted forward, catching something beneath the sound of the rising storm, something softer than thunder, something that lived between moments. A voice, not heard but known. His chest expanded with a slow breath, deeper than any he had taken in weeks, and his gaze drifted back to the grave. Daniel Hayes. The name did not change, but something inside Rex did. The stillness that had anchored him there began to loosen, like a command finally released. Another roll of thunder crossed the sky, closer now, and a sharp flash of lightning lit the cemetery in a single breath of white light. For an instant, everything was clear. Every stone, every shadow, every line carved into memory. And in that instant, Rex moved. Not away. Not yet. He stepped forward, closing the small distance to the grave, his paws, pressing into the damp earth as if grounding himself in something deeper than instinct. His nose hovered just above the grass, then lowered, touching the edge of the stone with a quiet, deliberate motion. It was not a search. It was recognition. The wind rose stronger, bending the trees until their branches whispered against one another, and the first drops of rain began to fall, light at first, tapping against the ground in uneven rhythm. Rex did not flinch. His body held steady, but his tail, which had not moved in days, gave a single, slow motion, almost uncertain, as if remembering something it had not felt in a long time. The scent came again, stronger now, carried between the rain and the wind, threading through the air with a familiarity that bypassed thought entirely. It was not the scent of earth, not the scent of stone. It was something older, something tied to mornings before sunrise, to boots on gravel, to a hand resting firm against his neck. Rex's breath caught, just for a moment, and his head lifted sharply, eyes searching the darkness beyond the graveyard's edge. The storm deepened, rain falling harder now, soaking into his fur, tracing lines down his face and along his back, but he did not retreat. He leaned forward instead, one step, then another, circling the grave with slow precision, as if following a path only he could see. Then he stopped, the space behind the headstone. The ground there looked no different from any other patch of soil, damp and dark beneath the growing rain, but Rex's posture changed again, sharper now, focused. His front paw lifted slightly, hovering above the earth, trembling not from weakness but from certainty. The thunder cracked overhead, louder than before, and in that moment, Rex understood. He had not been waiting for Daniel to return. He had been waiting for something to begin. The rain thickened into a steady curtain, turning the ground soft beneath Rex's paws, each drop carving quiet patterns into the soil, as if the earth itself were breathing. And he remained there, frozen in that single suspended moment, his lifted paw trembling above the spot behind the headstone, not from fear, not from weakness, but from something deeper, something that felt like recognition returning after being buried for too long. And then slowly, deliberately, he placed it down, pressing into the damp earth with intention, his claws sinking slightly as if testing the truth beneath the surface. And when nothing happened, when no sound came, no movement, no visible change, the world might have expected him to stop, to return to stillness. But Rex did not, because whatever had called him here was not something that ended with silence. It was something that required action. And so he began to dig, not frantically, not wildly, but with a controlled rhythm, each movement measured, each scrape of paw against soil steady and purposeful, as though following a command he could not ignore. The rain mixing with the loose dirt, clinging to his fur, coating his legs, but he continued, again and again, until the shallow layer of earth gave way to something firmer beneath. And then he stopped, his body going still once more, his head lowering slowly as his nose hovered just above the disturbed ground. And there was again that scent, clearer now, unmistakable, not of decay, not of the present, but of something preserved, something held back from time. And Rex let out a low sound, not quite a growl, not quite a whine, something in between, something that carried memory, because in that scent lived fragments of mornings filled with purpose, of boots stepping across gravel at first light, of a voice that did not need to be loud to be followed. And for a moment, the storm seemed to pull back, the thunder rolling farther away, the rain softening just enough for the air to shift. Again, and with that shift came something else, something small, something metallic, a faint sound barely louder than the rain itself, a soft clink, like two pieces of metal brushing together in the dark. And Rex's ears snapped forward, his entire body tightening as if struck by recognition, his head lifting sharply as his eyes scanned the space around him, searching, listening, waiting, and then it came again, clearer this time, the subtle, unmistakable sound of a dog tag tapping lightly against something unseen, and Rex's breath caught as his chest expanded, the air filling him with a sudden urgency that had been absent for months. and without hesitation, he moved closer to the spot, his nose pushing aside the loose soil, uncovering just enough to reveal the edge of something hidden beneath, something that had not been meant to stay buried. And though the object itself was still mostly concealed, Rex did not need to see it fully to understand, because what he felt was not curiosity, it was confirmation, and as another flash of lightning split the sky above, illuminating the cemetery in stark white, Rex stood there, soaked, steady, no longer waiting, because the truth had shifted, and the place he had guarded was no longer just a grave. It was a message that had finally been heard. The object beneath the soil did not shine, did not glow, did not announce itself with anything more than the quiet weight of presence. And yet Rex treated it as if it carried something sacred, his movements slowing, almost reverent, as he brushed the damp earth aside with careful strokes of his nose, revealing the edge of a small metal chain tangled just beneath the surface, worn, darkened by time, but unmistakable in shape. And when the next flicker of lightning crossed the sky, it caught just enough of its surface to confirm what Rex already knew: dog tags, partially buried, hidden where no one had thought to look, not on the grave, not with the body, but just behind it, as if placed there intentionally or lost in a moment no one had witnessed. And the faint clink returned as the chain shifted under his touch, the same sound that had cut through the storm and reached him, and Rex froze again, his breath shallow, his eyes fixed on the small opening in the earth, because in that sound lived something more than memory. It carried direction. And slowly, almost instinctively, he lowered his mouth and grasped the edge of the chain with gentle precision, lifting it free from the soil, the tags sliding loose with a soft resistance before giving way. And as they emerged fully into the rain, the metal caught the dim light, revealing the engraved surface beneath the dirt, letters worn but still present, still real, still tied to the name, carved into the stone, just inches away: Daniel Hayes. And for a moment, Rex simply held them there, suspended between ground and air, his jaw steady, his posture unmoving, as if awaiting confirmation that this was what he had been meant to find. And then something shifted again, not outside, but within him, a quiet alignment of instinct and memory that replaced the long stillness he had lived in for months. And without hesitation, he stepped back from the grave. One slow step, then another, the chain hanging from his mouth, tapping softly with each movement. And this time he did not stop. He did not return to his place beside the stone, because whatever had anchored him there had changed. The purpose that had held him in silence was no longer beneath his paws. It was now in his grasp. And as the rain continued to fall, washing away the marks of where he had dug, Rex turned his body toward the edge of the cemetery, his ears forward, his gaze fixed on a path that led beyond the rows of graves and into the dark stretch of trees that bordered the land, a place he had not approached since the day he first arrived. And for a brief moment he paused, not out of doubt, but out of recognition, his head lowering slightly toward the grave behind him, the tags resting against his chest. And though he did not look back fully, there was something in the stillness of that second that carried the weight of farewell, not final, not empty, but understood. And then he moved, stepping forward into the rain, leaving behind the place he had guarded for 117 days, not because he had forgotten, but because he had finally been given something to follow. Rex did not run, not at first, because the path ahead was not one of urgency, but of certainty. Each step placed with deliberate care as the rain softened the ground beneath him, and the world beyond the cemetery seemed to open in quiet invitation. The iron gate standing slightly ajar as it always had, yet tonight it felt different, not as a boundary, but as a threshold. And as he passed through it, the faint metallic rhythm of the tags brushing against each other marked his movement like a heartbeat returning after a long silence, steady, purposeful, alive. And beyond the gate the land dipped gently into a stretch of trees that had watched over the graves for decades, their branches bending under the weight of rain, their leaves whispering in low tones that seemed to guide rather than conceal. And Rex followed that unseen thread, his nose lifting occasionally into the damp air, testing, confirming, as if aligning himself with something that could not be seen but could still be followed. And the deeper he moved into the trees, the more the storm seemed to change, the thunder no longer overhead but rolling behind him, the rain easing just enough to reveal the quiet sounds beneath it, the soft crunch of earth, the distant echo of water collecting in unseen streams, and somewhere within that stillness, the memory of a voice that had once given direction without hesitation, a voice that did not need to be heard, allowed to be understood. And Rex moved toward it, not chasing, not searching, but responding, because this was not the confusion of a lost animal. This was the clarity of a command remembered. And after several yards, perhaps 50, perhaps more, the trees began to thin, opening into a small clearing where the ground rose slightly, forming a natural ridge that overlooked the lower edge of the cemetery from a distance. A place where the wind moved more freely, carrying scents in long, uninterrupted lines, and Rex slowed as he entered the space, his body lowering slightly, not in fear, but in focus, his ears forward, his eyes scanning the edges of the clearing as if expecting something to reveal itself at any moment. And then he stopped because the scent shifted again, stronger now, layered with something older, something tied to a different place, a different time, and his gaze fixed on a single point near the base of a weathered oak tree, its trunk wide and scarred by years of storms, its roots stretching deep into the earth. And there, partially hidden beneath a thin layer of leaves and time, was something else, something small, something that did not belong to the forest. And Rex approached slowly, the tag still hanging from his mouth, his steps quieter now, almost cautious, as if he understood that what lay ahead was not meant to be disturbed without purpose. And when he reached the base of the tree, he lowered his head once more, the familiar motion, returning, but this time it was different, not searching for what was hidden, but recognizing what had been left behind. And as the wind moved through the clearing, carrying that same faint echo of memory, Rex set the dog tags gently on the ground before him, releasing them with care, as if placing them exactly where they were meant to be. And for a moment, everything still, the rain, the wind, even the distant thunder seemed to pause, and in that quiet, Rex stood, waiting again, but no longer for something to begin. Now he was waiting to understand what came next. The clearing held its breath, and Rex stood within it, unmoving except for the slow rise and fall of his chest, his gaze fixed on the space just beyond the dog tags he had placed at the base of the oak. And for a long moment, nothing happened. No sound, no shift, no sign that what he had done mattered to anything beyond himself. And yet he did not turn away, because something in the air had changed, something subtle but undeniable, like the quiet difference between waiting and being heard. And then the wind moved again, not as a passing gust, but as a steady current that circled through the clearing, lifting the leaves just enough to reveal what had been hidden beneath them, a small patch of disturbed earth, older than the grave, older than the storm. And Rex's ears lifted higher as his body leaned forward, drawn by that same thread that had led him here. And slowly, carefully, he stepped closer, lowering his head toward the ground, his nose brushing aside the thin layer of leaves, uncovering a shallow impression in the soil, not freshly made, not obvious, but deliberate. And within it lay something small, something that had waited longer than he had, a worn piece of fabric, faded with time, stitched in a pattern that still held its shape despite the years, a fragment of an old military bandana, the kind that carried scent long after it had been forgotten by the world. And the moment Rex touched it, everything inside him shifted again, not sharply, not violently, but with a quiet certainty that settled into his bones, because this was not just something left behind, this was something placed, something chosen, and the scent that rose from it, faint but unmistakable, carried the same presence he had followed from the grave, the same trace that had guided him through the storm. And Rex lowered himself slowly onto the damp ground, his body folding with care beside the tree, his nose resting just inches from the bandana and the dog tags, both now lying together as if they had always belonged in the same place. And for the first time since he had left the grave, he exhaled fully, a long, steady breath that seemed to release something he had carried for far too long. And the storm began to ease, the rain softening into a light mist that drifted through the clearing like a quiet veil. And in that softened silence, something else emerged, not a sound that could be heard, not a shape that could be seen, but a presence that filled the space between the trees with a calm that did not belong to the storm or the night. And Rex's eyes softened, his ears lowering slightly, not in submission, but in recognition, because whatever had called him here was no longer distant. It was here, complete, and though no words were spoken, no command given, there was an understanding that passed through him, clear and steady, the kind that does not need language to be followed, and slowly. After a moment that felt both brief and endless, Rex lifted his head, his gaze no longer searching, no longer questioning, and he looked out beyond the clearing, toward the faint outline of the cemetery in the distance, visible through the thinning trees. And he did not feel pulled back. He did not feel the weight that had kept him there for 117 days, because something had changed. Not the place, not the past, but the promise. And as the first hint of dawn began to touch the horizon with a pale, quiet light, Rex rose to his feet again, steady now, certain, and he did not look behind him, because he did not need to. The message had been received, the path had been completed, and whatever had been left unfinished was no longer waiting in silence. It had found its way home. The first light of morning did not arrive all at once. It crept slowly across the horizon, pale and fragile, stretching through the trees in thin strands that touched the clearing with quiet intention, and Rex stood there within it, no longer searching, no longer pulled by something unseen, but grounded in a stillness that felt different from the one he had known beside the grave. This was not waiting. This was understanding. And as the light grew stronger, it revealed the small arrangement at the base of the oak, the worn bandana, the dog tags resting beside it, both now uncovered, no longer hidden beneath earth or time. And Rex lowered his head once more, not to search, not to question, but to acknowledge, his nose brushing gently against the metal, causing a soft, familiar sound that no longer carried urgency, only memory. And then he turned, slowly, deliberately, his body aligning toward the path that led back through the thinning trees. And this time, when he stepped forward, there was no hesitation, no pause between movements. Each step flowed into the next with a quiet confidence that had been absent for months. And as he moved, the forest seemed to open for him, the branches no longer whispering in uncertainty, but parting in calm acceptance. And the scent that had guided him here began to fade, not disappearing abruptly, but dissolving into something softer, something that no longer needed to lead, because it had already fulfilled its purpose. And Rex did not try to follow it. He did not slow to hold on to it. He simply continued forward, carrying what remained of it within him. And when he reached the edge of the clearing, he paused just once, his head turning slightly, as if listening for something behind him. But there was no call, no sound, only the quiet of morning settling into the land. And that was enough. And so he moved on, stepping back into the narrow path between the trees. The ground still damp beneath his paws, the air cool and clean as the storm fully passed. And ahead, through the branches, the cemetery began to reappear, its rows of white stones catching the first true light of day, standing silent and unchanged. And yet when Rex reached the gate once more, he did not enter immediately. He stopped just outside, his gaze resting on the place he had called home for 117 days. And for a moment, time seemed to fold in on itself, the memory of long nights, of rain and wind, of stillness and waiting, all present at once. And his ears lowered slightly, his body still, as if honoring what had been. But there was no pull to return, no weight anchoring him there anymore. And after a breath, steady and complete, he turned his head away from the graves, not in rejection, but in release, and stepped past the gate without crossing back inside, choosing instead the path that ran along the outer edge of the cemetery, leading toward a road barely visible in the distance. And as he walked, the sun finally broke free from the horizon, casting a warm light across the land, touching his fur, drying the last traces of rain. And in that light, Rex did not look like a dog that had been waiting. He looked like one that had been given direction again, his stride even, his gaze forward. And, though he carried nothing in his mouth now, there was something in the way he moved that made it clear he was no longer empty, because whatever he had been holding onto all this time had finally found its place. And in its absence, something quieter, something steadier had taken its place. And for the first time since the day Daniel Hayes had been laid to rest, Rex walked not as a guardian of what was lost, but as a companion to what still remained. The road beyond the cemetery was narrow and quiet, a strip of worn asphalt that stretched between fields still damp from the night's storm, and Rex followed it without hesitation, his paws finding a steady rhythm against the ground as the morning air carried the scent of fresh earth and distant wood smoke. And for the first time in many days, his head was not lowered in watch, but lifted slightly, taking in the world as it unfolded ahead of him. And though his body still bore the signs of long waiting, the thinness beneath his coat, the slow stiffness in his stride, there was something in the way he moved that felt restored, not in strength, but in purpose. And as the sun climbed higher, casting longer light across the fields, the silence of the road began to give way to life. A truck passing in the distance, the faint hum of tires, a porch door opening somewhere unseen. Small signs that the world had continued even while he had remained still, and Rex did not shy away from these sounds. He did not retreat into the edges of the path. Instead, he continued forward, steady and present, as if rejoining something he had once been part of. And after a while, perhaps half a mile, perhaps more, the road curved gently toward a small cluster of buildings. Simple homes set back from the roadside with wide yards and wooden fences, the kind of place where mornings moved slowly and quietly. And as Rex approached, a figure appeared at the far end of a gravel driveway, an older man standing beside a mailbox, his posture slightly bent but steady, his eyes narrowing as he noticed the dog moving along the road. And for a moment, neither of them moved, the distance between them holding a quiet tension, not of fear, but of recognition without understanding. And the man took a step forward, then another, his voice calling out, low and cautious, "Hey there, boy." And Rex slowed, not stopping entirely, but easing his pace as his ears turned toward the sound. And when their eyes met, something unspoken passed between them, something that did not rely on words or history, only presence. And the man's expression softened, his hand lowering slightly, as if he understood that this was not a stray passing through, not just another animal searching for food or shelter, but something else, something carrying a weight he could not see. And Rex paused for just a moment at the edge of the driveway, his gaze steady, his body calm. And then, without needing invitation, he stepped forward, closing the distance with quiet confidence. And the man did not reach out immediately. He did not rush the moment. He simply stood there, allowing the space between them to settle naturally. And when Rex finally came to a stop a few feet away, the man nodded once, almost to himself, and said softly, "You look like you have been somewhere important." And Rex did not respond with movement or sound, but something in his stillness carried the answer. And after a moment, the man turned slightly, gesturing toward the house behind him. "Come on then," he said, his voice steady. "You do not have to walk alone anymore." And Rex stood there, just for a second longer, the road stretching behind him, the cemetery far out of sight, and then he stepped forward again, this time not following a scent, not following a memory, but walking beside someone new, not replacing what had been lost, but carrying it forward in a way that no longer required him to stay behind. The house was quiet in a way that felt lived in, not empty, the kind of quiet that held years within its walls. And as Rex stepped onto the wooden porch, the boards creaked softly beneath his weight, a sound so ordinary it almost felt unfamiliar after so many nights of silence among stone and wind. And the man opened the door without hesitation, holding it just wide enough, not forcing, not calling again, simply allowing the choice to remain Rex's. And for a brief moment, Rex paused at the threshold, his body still, his gaze drifting back toward the road he had walked, toward the unseen distance where the cemetery rested beyond the trees and fields, and though it was no longer visible, it was not gone. It lived quietly somewhere within him, steady and unbroken. And then he stepped inside, crossing the threshold with a calm that carried no weight of hesitation, only acceptance, and the warmth of the room met him gently, wrapping around his damp coat, easing the last traces of cold from his body, and the man moved slowly, setting a metal bowl down near the corner of the kitchen, filling it with fresh water, the simple sound of it echoing softly in the space. And Rex approached without urgency, lowering his head to drink, each movement measured, not desperate, just present. And when he finished, he lifted his head and looked around, taking in the small details, a worn chair by the window, a pair of boots near the door, a framed photograph resting on a shelf. And though he did not move toward it, something in his gaze lingered, there for a moment, as if recognizing a familiar absence shared between lives. And the man noticed, his eyes following Rex's line of sight before softening slightly. "Yeah," he said quietly, more to himself than to the dog. "We both lost someone, didn't we?" And Rex did not respond with sound, but he moved closer, not seeking comfort, not offering it in the way humans understood, but simply standing there beside him, present, steady, and that was enough. And the day moved forward in small, quiet ways, the light shifting through the windows, the sounds of the world returning in gentle layers. And Rex remained, not pacing, not searching, but settling, his body lowering onto the floor near the door, as if instinctively choosing a place between inside and out, between what had been and what was now. And, as the hours passed, something subtle became clear. He was no longer waiting, not for a voice, not for a signal, not for something to begin, because whatever had needed to be completed had found its end, not in a moment of noise or spectacle, but in a quiet understanding carried through a storm and into the morning. And later, as the sun dipped low again and shadows stretched across the yard, Rex rose once more, stepping outside onto the porch, his gaze lifting toward the horizon where the skies softened into shades of gold and fading blue. And he stood there, still calm, not pulled back, not held in place, simply present in the space he now occupied, and somewhere far beyond the fields, beyond the trees, beyond the rows of white stone, the place he had guarded remained unchanged, but the bond that had tied him to it had not been broken. It had simply shifted, no longer rooted in waiting, but carried forward in the quiet way he stood, the steady way he breathed, and the gentle way he chose to stay, because some promises are not meant to hold us in place forever. Some are meant to lead us forward. And in that still evening light, Rex did not look like a dog who had left something behind. He looked like one who had finally understood where to go next. In this deeply emotional journey, a loyal German shepherd refuses to leave the grave of a fallen U.S. Marine, embodying one of the most powerful animal stories ever told about loyalty, grief, and silent promises that transcend death. Through cold mornings, relentless storms, and long nights beneath an open sky, the dog remains still, as if guarding not just a memory, but a mission left unfinished, until one mysterious night changes everything and sets him on a path guided not by sight, but by instinct and something greater than instinct. This cinematic narrative unfolds like the most compelling animal stories, where a canine companion senses what humans cannot, uncovering hidden dog tags and following an unseen signal into the forest, revealing a quiet truth buried beneath time and silence. As the story progresses, the bond between the Marine and his dog transforms from mourning into meaning, showing how even after loss, purpose can still be found in the smallest signs and actions, making this one of those unforgettable animal stories that resonate with anyone who believes in loyalty beyond words. The discovery beneath the oak tree, where memory and meaning finally align, brings a sense of spiritual closure that defines the essence of great animal stories, where the dog is not just waiting, but fulfilling a final promise left behind. In the end, as the German shepherd leaves the grave and steps into a new chapter beside a quiet human who understands loss in his own way, the story. Gently reminds us that love does not end, it evolves, and that even in silence, some bonds guide us forward, making this one of the most touching and meaningful animal stories you will ever experience. Character 1, a 34-year-old white U.S. Marine with short dark hair, light stubble, weathered skin, wearing military uniform and dog tags, solemn expression, front-facing portrait, realistic lighting, cinematic detail, sharp focus, no cartoon, no CGI, no illustration. Character 2, a 6-year-old German Shepherd dog with sable coat, black and tan fur, strong athletic build, alert ears, amber eyes, standing full body, front-facing view, realistic lighting, cinematic detail, no cartoon, no CGI, no illustration.